everyone. This is Rhiannon Payne, Marketing Director at Ruby Central, and I'm here today with David Heinemeier Hansson, otherwise known as DHH, who probably needs no introduction, but is the creator of Rails, as well as the CTO of 37 Signals, which produces products like Basecamp and Hey, while driving innovation in the Rails ecosystem. David, it's great having you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. We'll jump right into this. We're very excited to announce that you will be doing a special fireside chat keynote at the FINAL RailsConf in Philadelphia this summer. What is it that you're most looking forward to sharing with the community at the event? Is there a theme or message that you'd like to leave attendees with?
So first of all, I'm just really excited to be back. I think the last one I was at was in 19 before COVID got going and things got weird for a couple of years. But to celebrate the history of RailsConf all the way back to 2006 when we did the first one in Chicago, and the many great moments and fun that we've had in the years afterwards is just going to be extremely special. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I also think it's just an incredible time in the Ruby on Rails community. There's so much interest in Rails coming from people who perhaps wouldn't have paid attention 5, 6, 7 years ago. The narrative around the web being all about JavaScript is thankfully breaking up a bit, and people are excited to explore alternatives again. In Ruby on Rails, we're here. We've been making the framework better than it's ever been. The language itself has improved so much. And some of the underlying technologies that we rely on, such as the browser, have improved incredibly. You just get so much further these days with Rails than you used to without having to become halfway a JavaScript developer as well. I think that appeals to a lot of people. The fundamental message of the one developer framework continues to be as strong as it ever is. Perhaps it's even stronger now with AI really accelerating what a single individual can do. And I think both Ruby and Rails is incredibly well positioned for this AI age. Ruby, because it is simply the most beautiful programming language in the world that is uniquely well suited for a computer to help you write so that you can actually read it later. Is not going to produce just reams and reams of code like it would in some other environments that are perhaps very difficult for you to parse. The computer and you can actually speak a common language, Ruby, that is really close to English, which is the same language we use for prompting. So I think that's really nice. And then I also think it's really nice that Rails is such a convention over configuration framework, which means that all this training data that the AI is picking up upon is basically teaching it how to write idiomatic Rails code, which is just a lot easier, I think, than it is in a lot of other environments where there are a myriad of choices and you have to put the whole package together yourself. Rails comes pre-configured, it comes omakase, and AI can really lean into that. So I think between those two pillars, that the underlying technology of the browsers improved incredibly well over the last few years, that Rails itself had really leaned into get the best of that, all our work with no build, all our work with no pass, that you can do everything yourself without having to rely on either JavaScript builders or the cloud, can get supercharged by this exciting development of AI.
Absolutely. It really is an amazing time for the ecosystem right now. We had obviously the introduction of Rails 8 at Rails World last year in Toronto. And you make a really interesting point about AI as well and the future of Ruby and Rails as a programming language being so well positioned for this new movement of AI-powered startups. This is something that I've been saying as well. Ruby and Rails being so human-centric, it does make so much sense that it would be the language of choice for a lot of AI startups that are up and coming. And that's something that I would love to dig into more. I'm sure you're going to touch on at your fireside chat keynote this summer. So just looking forward to hearing more about that because I think there's a lot of interest from the community.
No doubt. I think that's the other thing about AI, that from some corners, it is looked upon with some trepidation. And I think that's completely natural. We're seeing a big shift, one of those great paradigm moves, just like mobile devices, just like the internet itself. And I think that's understandably giving people a little bit of quivers. We don't know where this is going to go, but I think if we lean in to the optimism about where this could take us, I think we can go incredibly far. And I think this is the only way to do it anyway. You're not going to continue to thrive to sort of just take a back seat and say, you know what, this new development, we're not interested. We're going to go about everything exactly the same as before this happened. I don't think that's a winning strategy. So I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited too about the number of premier Ruby on Rails shops and flagship companies that are leaning in incredibly hard into this. I'm on the board of Shopify, who's been leading the charge of how to integrate AI in their offering. Toby just dropped their summer announcements. It's just absolutely packed with amazing things that they're doing with AI. Intercom, another company with their Fin AI support chat agent. There's just an enormous amount of interest and sort of spirit for it right now that I think marinates incredibly well with the dish we've always had with Rails, that we've always been excited about new developments. We've always been eager to push things forward. So I think this is a really special time for the Ruby on Rails community, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more.
It really does feel like a turning point for the community, for the ecosystem. There's a lot of, I think, fresh life and energy and excitement in the air. And I'd love to chat a little bit about this transition, this new era. RailsConf may be ending, but obviously the Rails ecosystem is thriving in new ways now. What has that been like for you to create and host Rails World through the Rails Foundation? How has that experience shaped your view of what Rails events could be?
Well, I think it was something that was just overdue. Rails has been big enough as its own community for a very long time that it could be better served with a foundation that was focused 100% just on the Rails ecosystem itself. Now, of course, we are part of the larger and broader Ruby ecosystem as well, and I'm incredibly thankful for all those years and all those conferences that Ruby Central helped put on. And I think that in some ways becomes easier. I think whatever friction there was in the past can kind of flow as water under the bridge, and we can look forward to an easier road of collaboration where the Rails Foundation focuses 100% on Rails. Ruby Central is free to pursue all the other open questions in the Ruby community, and together there's a Ruby on Rails sort of constellation where we can come together and help each other with a very clear division of labor. I think that was the part that over the years perhaps sometimes got a little muddy. And there's really no need to it. I think the experience we've had with Rails World, the first one sold out in 45 minutes in Amsterdam. We put on an entirely new show from an entirely new group of people that had no sort of track record of organizing these things directly. Then in Toronto, we sold out in 15 minutes, and now we're back in Amsterdam and sold out in an incredible 2 minutes. So clearly there was a pent-up demand for something like this, where Rails World is focused around what's new in Rails, what are the new frameworks, what are the new techniques, what are the new releases, and we can really hone in on that aspect of it and do an incredible good job of that just because that's the whole game. That also means that there's plenty of room in the Ruby on Rails ecosystem to have other conferences that focuses on a broader agenda that isn't just about what's new in Rails, what are the latest developments with the frameworks and so forth. And I think that too actually opens things up a bit, that Rails World is quite narrow in some ways about its focus and what you can expect to learn at Rails World. You're going to learn all about the new frameworks. You're going to learn all about the new techniques. But there's a bunch of other things. Not everything has to be the newest thing. There's a lot of great lessons to be taught from the back catalog of everything we've been working on from a broader perspective. It isn't just about the technology, perhaps some of the softer aspects of software development and methodology and all these other things. And I think we're also seeing that the Ruby conference world is bigger than it's ever been. There are more conferences out there now than we've had in a very long time. There's more attendees. There's just more overall excitement for it. So I think these things work really well in concert. And I also think it just eases things up, that whatever rubbing and whatever tension there's been in the past kind of can just dissipate. We can forget all about it and just move forward and focus on helping each other, both Ruby helping Rails and Rails helping Ruby.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really can't have one without the other. Ruby and Rails are like peanut butter and jelly. Our ecosystems really need each other, rely on each other, need to support each
Yes.
other. I think it's really great that we now have this clear path forward where you and the Rails Foundation do have these targeted events very focused on the Rails ecosystem. And Ruby Central is continuing to run RubyConf every year while also supporting a lot of regional events and local events from meetups,
Yes.
regional conferences all over the world, helping them get grant funding and help first-time event hosts produce new events. It really feels like the ecosystem is moving in such a positive direction. And you mentioned as well the global growth of Ruby and Rails events and how there's more events than ever. From Brazil to Latvia and all over the world, we're seeing these massive conferences. What are your thoughts on how the Ruby and Rails community is expanding in such a global and very grassroots way?
I love to see it. I mean, putting on a conference is really hard, as I'm sure anyone who's been involved with it knows that it's a big financial risk, especially when you put on these bigger conferences. The budget for the latest Rails World is just blowing my mind. I can't imagine, like, why is it so expensive to get people to meet up in this way? So the fact that we can distribute some of that burden and some of that responsibility to more regional conferences, some of them quite large, some of them a bit smaller, but also driven by a grassroots approach, volunteers who just love being part of the Ruby and Rails communities and put it on for that love of the community. It's just wonderful to see. I keep hearing about people going to all these conferences, and I get a little jealous. I don't have the bandwidth in my personal schedule to appear at all these conferences, but I very often wish that I did. Whenever I see the pictures, Tropical on Rails was one of the conferences recently where I was like, dang it, I wish I could be there. I think Kaigi on Rails was recently as well. I'm hoping to get back to Japan maybe next year, trying to see if I can line that schedule up so it works out. But it's just wonderful to see. And it's wonderful to see that there's still this level of excitement this long into it. Ruby on Rails is 22 years old if you take the framework, and it's well over 30 years old if you take the language itself. To be able to still drum up this amount of enthusiasms from volunteers, from newcomers, it's not just a bunch of slight gray beards here. I've grown a couple of gray over the years. It's people who just joined the community. It's people who've been here for a long time, but there's still that electricity in the air. And I do think that there's something about Ruby that really fosters that. Ruby is not just a tool. It's not just something we reach for when we want to bang in a nail. It's not just a hammer. It's so much more than that. It is beautiful code. It is the idea of software engineering and software writing. I think that really speaks to more than just the classical engineering part of the brain. It speaks to an artist part of the brain. It speaks to the heart. And when you're able to speak to more than just this analytical sense of the brain, I also think that it really helps a community stick together and continue to be excited to push forward. After 20 years, I mean, if we think back over the last 20, 30 years, how many technologies have come and gone? Or how many technologies are just vaguely around still as ghosts, but with no excitement, no real momentum in the community? It's most of them. We are absolutely an incredible outlier in the long history of computer science and certainly web technology. If you look at, as I said, other communities, the JavaScript community, for one, seem to go through a new framework every 3 months for a while, right? I think the fact that we've had this kind of staying power is a testament to, first of all, to Ruby and what we've all been able to take away from that. I started with Ruby and dabbled in it, looked at it, learned from it in 2001. I mean, that's a completely different age. The fact that we're still programming Ruby, the fact that the Ruby I write today is 100% recognizable from the kind of Ruby I wrote well over 20 years ago, it's just mind-blowing to me. And it's just so heartening that not only I, but so many others in the community have been able to dedicate their career to this, that we are now reaching the length of life of this community that fits with the length of life of a lot of careers. So I think that there's just a real staying power in that. And there's therefore a real appeal to newcomers to join us because they can see a community that doesn't just throw away everything it learns every 6 to 8 months, right? If you learned active record back in 2007, you can absolutely still apply those lessons and the experience today, even though active record is much better and it's more expansive. The fundamental concepts are staying together and they're staying the same. And I think it really rewards someone's investment into learning Ruby on Rails because it is an investment. It is an investment whenever you want to learn a new programming language. It's certainly an investment if you want to get good at it. And if you want to learn a framework as expansive as Rails, I think it's really nice to know that that knowledge and that investment isn't just throwaway. It's actually an investment. It's not just an expenditure. So I hope we can continue to push that forward. I hope we can continue to form those bonds and encourage people to see their career as something that's just not a constant thrashing churn, where they're constantly learning disposable skills and knowledge that they then have to completely rewrite and relearn shortly thereafter. Of course, we should always be open to learning new things. We talked briefly about AI. That's a completely new component, and a lot of programmers are still figuring out how that fits in with their profession. But it's even more important then, in an era where it feels like everything is up in the air, that there are some pillars that ground us and hold us together. And I think Ruby on Rails is exactly that.
You just said so much so eloquently. I particularly loved your point about how Ruby and Rails kind of speak to the artistic, creative side of the brain and how that possibly has been the foundation of why this has been such a long-standing, thriving community is because it isn't just analytical code, clock in, clock out. I think Ruby and Rails engineers really do have an artist spirit. And that's why we do have all of these amazing events popping up all over the world. You mentioned Ruby Kaigi as well, Ruby Central. We had several of us were there at Ruby Kaigi last month, and it was actually their largest conference ever with 1,500 attendees. That's one thing we've been talking about a lot at Ruby Central, especially since that event. How can we do more to connect the dots globally between these different ecosystems? And on the topic of RailsConf, you've been part of RailsConf for the better part of almost 2 decades now. What are some of your favorite memories from the past conferences?
There's so many, but I must call out the first one in Chicago we did in 2006. The budget wasn't exactly grand at the time, so we had to find pretty much the cheapest venue that we could, and the cheapest venue that could hold, I forget whether we had 400 or 600 people. It really was special because it kicked off this reign of Rails conferences every year. And I'm also really fond of the keynote I gave that year, which talked about REST and transitioned the Rails way of writing controllers from this kind of sprawling free-for-all where people kept adding more and more action methods onto their mega controllers before they might have 10, 20, 50 different methods on these controllers, and then introducing the REST principles that really slimmed down these controllers to the point where they had a maximum of 7 actions that they can do, and introduced the idea that constraints were a really helpful technique to make sure that your code base didn't run away from you. So I have really fond memories of that. I also really liked, I think it was 2009, after MERB and early Ruby web framework merged with Rails, and we had Yehuda Katz and the other folks from the MERB development team really coming together after a bit of a time, almost acrimonious exchange, that we pulled our resources, we pulled our energies, we pulled our good ideas, and took a bunch of really interesting directions from MERB and put them into Rails and showed that, you know what, sometimes even if you start off thinking you're on different paths, quite often through conversation, through direct human contact, you'll realize that you're not actually as far apart as you thought. You don't actually have completely different visions of how things should be. This was what I took away from the MERB into Rails merger, that there were a bunch of really smart people who were very passionate about extensibility, that thought they couldn't fit those ideas into Rails. They thought that Rails was closed to those kinds of extensions. And then through conversation, realized that wasn't true at all. That so much of Rails is a product of just the open source gifts that the people who've showed up have decided to share. It doesn't mean that there aren't room for more gifts. In fact, if anything, it's an invitation for anyone to bring their gifts, the things that they care about. Occasionally, we can disagree about whether a gift fits into the pool or not, but most of the time, you'll find that people are incredibly gracious about accepting those gifts of contributions. And if you're really passionate about a thing like gem extendability of Rails, like the MERP team was, you'll find a very receptive audience into that. So I was really happy with that. I thought it was a great way of sort of dissolving some tensions and getting humans just eye to eye work towards a common goal. And I think anyone who looks back upon the history of Ruby on Rails now will realize, do you know what? That was a pivotal moment. It helped not fracture the framework, not have fractured the ecosystem. A lot of other development environments have not been so lucky, have seen incredible fracturing. Ruby and Rails is quite unique in the sense that there is such a uniformity. There should always be room for experimentation and alternatives and so forth. But I think a lot of benefits have accrued to both Rails and to Ruby by the fact that the majority, the lion's share of the attention went into one shared framework that we could move forward when someone wanted to work on web technology. So that was really special. And then the other one I really like was, I'm trying to remember whether it was 12 or 14, but I gave a keynote about being a software writer, which really connects to these themes we were just talking about. That software engineering is very often positioned as the way to be a programmer, that every programmer aspires to be an engineer. And I think it's really important that we have a lot of engineers who are really good at the engineering hard stuff. Extremely important. And the Ruby community and the Rails community have a ton of people like that. Classically trained computer scientists and engineers who can discern a hotspot, find a solution for it, and give us some of this fundamental improvement. But as important as that is, I think it's also been absolutely pivotal to defining who we are in the Ruby on Rails world and in the Rails community in particular, that it's more than that. We care about more than the most computer sympathetic way of writing code, the most memory efficient way of writing code, the fastest way of writing code. No, we also care about writing code for each other, for humans. Ruby, since day one, has been all about programmer happiness, not about being the fastest. Now, the funny thing, of course, is that through that focus on the human productivity, human happiness, human thriving, we've attracted enough programmers and in turn, very large companies who've then seen an advantage in making Ruby and making Rails much, much faster. So today you get to have your cake and eat it too. You have this fundamental focus on the human. The human is number one, the computer is number two. When we design Rails, when we design Ruby, but we've still managed to make Ruby incredibly fast. Ruby 3 and the whole notion of making it 3 times faster than Ruby 2 has come through. The work and investment that Shopify has done into Widget has made everything just so much faster and therefore cheaper to run. But do you know what? Humans continue to be both the most important part of the equation and also the most expensive part of the equation. I love to talk about how Ruby on Rails is a luxurious framework at a budget. It's not on a budget that everyone can afford. If you're working on applications that have a very slight margin on a lot of requests, maybe you need a Go, maybe you need a C#, maybe you even need hand-tuned assembler or some other really low-level language. But if you can have just a minimum of profitability per request, you can afford the extreme luxury of letting your programmers work with Ruby on Rails, the productivity that it affords, but also just the sheer human happiness. I find so many Ruby on Rails programmers, and I've met so many of them at RailsConfs over the years, and now at Rails World and other events, who are just feeling blessed that they get to do this, that this is their job, that they're getting paid to write Ruby, and that they really, really love it. Now, I know there are a lot of other programming languages that do engender similar feelings, but I'd wager the argument that Ruby and by extension Rails does more of that for more people than almost any other development environment on earth. That we are creating that bond between the programmer and their programming environment and their programming language and their programming framework that have almost like a poetic sense to it. Again, it is not just about making better tools. It's not just about being more productive. It's not just about being more machine efficient. And those topics have resonated, I think, hopefully, in all the keynotes that I've given at RailsConf over the years. And then it's also just been an absolute pleasure to be able to meet as many programmers as I've met at RailsConf over the years. For a very long time, it was the only conference I would show up to every year and meet people in person. I'd have tons of conversation with programmers online, some of them supportive, some of them acrimonious, but then I'd show up and I'd meet people in person. And you just get a different sense, you get a different joy, you get a different reward from being part of a community when you're eye to eye with someone, when you're sharing a sandwich with someone, where you're standing in line with someone and having a conversation about this shared passion of all of us. So I'm really thankful that RailsConf for so many years provided that opportunity, not just for me, but for everyone who cared to go.
Absolutely. And it makes sense. Ruby and Rails are such human-centric language and framework that it would be these conferences like RailsConf over the years that have done so much bringing people together, that's driven so much collaboration, innovation, done so much to push the framework forward. Again, very excited to have you join us for the last one because I think it is going to be a really special celebration of that. Wanted to jump in and chat a little bit about the Rails Foundation, the organization that produces Rails World. Outside of just Rails World, what is your long-term vision for the Rails Foundation? What role do you hope it will play in the ecosystem in the coming years?
So when I started noodling on the idea, it was clear to me that a foundation that was dedicated to Rails had to have multiple legs to stand on. It wasn't just about conferences. We have been better in the Ruby on Rails community than so many other communities about producing really good documentation over the years, getting some really great writers and programmers who were great writers to contribute to excellent documentation. But it is also an area that can really benefit from some high production values, some folks producing videos and other really time-consuming efforts that not always just emerge organically out of the community, or sometimes it does emerge organically, but it then emerges as a commercial endeavor. There's been a ton of really good video producers who've produced an incredible volume of commercial training content, and I think it's a huge benefit to Ruby on Rails that those things are out there. But I also wanted to make sure that the Rails Foundation was focused on producing free, excellent documentation material. So some of the things that we've been focusing on have shipped already is a brand new Rails tutorial that feels like it's completely up to date. One of the questions I always kind of struggled a little bit to answer in just a simple way was when someone would ask me, Ruby on Rails sounds wonderful. How do I learn it? And then I'd go, well, there's this tutorial you could buy. There's this YouTube channel you could follow. And those things are still great. And I'm very thankful for it. But I'd also always love to be able to just say, go to rubyonrails.org. It has everything you need to get started. It has the tutorial, it has the video, it has the just great API documentation that's being really well maintained, very nicely presented. It doesn't feel dated. This isn't just a bunch of old people sitting around reminiscing about old times. Like, this is a framework that's appealing to new people, to young people, to someone who's not already versed in the entire history of the framework, in all the nuances of the language. That's an area where the Rails Foundation can really help. The other part of it is that the Rails Foundation is actually, in sort of its legal sense, it's a business association, which is different from a nonprofit. It's not a nonprofit. This is a business association because I firmly believe that the strength and the endurance of the Ruby on Rails community is extremely intertwined with the strength and the health of the flagship companies, the major companies that we have in this ecosystem, that these companies all have a shared interest in making sure that Ruby on Rails continues to get developed, continues to be well documented, continues to be popular and part of the conversation, because they want to hire programmers not just today, but in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And to attract the next generation of programmers, I think there's a shared common mission here that these companies can chip in and realize that burden is something we can better lift together. And if you can get a handful of companies together to chip in materially, to put on these productions, to produce documentation, to produce conferences, to produce marketing material, we all win. We all get more back than what we put in. So I think that is something that Ruby on Rails has actually navigated really well in its 20 plus years. It's never been business hostile. It's never just been run by a bunch of open source ideologues. There's nothing wrong. I very much appreciate that that exists. It's not where I exist. I exist in a space where business isn't bad. I exist in a space where the fact that businesses, whether it's a Shopify or it's a GitHub or it's an Intercom or it's a 37 Signals or it's any of these other companies, major companies that's built on the back of Ruby on Rails, their success is our success. Their ability to hire more programmers is our benefit with more programmers in the ecosystem. So it's really intertwined in a sense that I thought it important that those values were upfront right away. There wasn't anything bad about business. We're not hiding that this is a business association that in large part is funded and missioned according to what those businesses need. Because having those businesses stick around, having them continue to thrive, having them being able to hire new people is what's going to give us all a better long-term ecosystem. It's going to produce all the gems you want to use for all the new systems. It's going to keep everything up to date. That's what I really appreciate about the Rails Foundation. I mean, we started at the core level and got a small group of people who really chipped in big. And now we have a supporting group level of companies as well who are helping to shore this up, to build a sustainable, long-term, durable budget, yearly budget, and some institutional longevity that in time, it won't just be Amanda Perino and me as the chair and the core members. It'll be more than that. It'll be broader than that. It'll be able to outlive any individual company, an individual person, an individual sort of endeavor. And I think that's how you create the foundation for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's imperative that we bring together these big companies like Shopify, GitHub, like you said, whose infrastructure, whose products really rely on Ruby and Rails, and make them a big part of the conversation. They do so much, their teams do so much to contribute to open source and innovation happening in the ecosystem. To kind of cap this conversation off, I'd love to ask, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but looking forward, how would you like to see Ruby Central and the Rails Foundation continue to support and complement each other as the ecosystem keeps growing?
I think it's really great now that we have this clear separation in terms of responsibility, that Ruby, the underpinning language of Rails, has a organization dedicated entirely to that mission and can focus on things like the development of Bundler and of Ruby gems, some of the absolute core infrastructure that everyone in the Ruby community relies on, but Rails relies on very heavily. The majority of gems that are being distributed and installed every day are Rails gems. So I think we have just some great points of overlap where the efforts meet. And then we have our own focuses, the fact that Ruby Central, of course, should be interested in promoting all sorts of other frameworks, whether it's Rails or something else, the experimentation and the niche operations that also exist in the community. I think that's really important that there is an organization who can fit that in. Whereas it would be weird at a Rails conference for us to talk about a bunch of other Ruby frameworks. That just doesn't fit in, and that's totally fine. It doesn't need to, because we can have more than one organization. And then I also think that just even more integration, we share a lot of the same corporate partners and same corporate sponsors, the Shopifys and the GitHubs and all of these other companies that are huge and important in the Rails world are also huge and important in the Ruby world. The focus on security, is really key to this. The ensuring that we have a supply chain of gems and of infrastructure that can't be compromised, and we have a coordination of CVE handling and so forth, I think is some of those obvious overlaps where Ruby and Rails need to work together and are working together, and we can strengthen that even further. And I think there's great opportunity for that collaboration to blossom even further. And now that whatever nonsense that was in the past is gone, and we can just focus on moving forward together and focusing on the best for the combined Venn diagram of Rails and of Ruby and the huge shared middle there.
Yeah, that's very well said. To your point, we do have a lot of the same corporate sponsors. We have a lot of the same goals in mind. Obviously, we, as Ruby Central and you guys as the Rails Foundation, want this ecosystem as a holistic whole to succeed and thrive well into the future. So again, we're happy to have you join us for the final RailsConf, and I'm looking forward to hearing that conversation. I think it's going to be really interesting. And maybe even hearing some stories from like the early days of Rails too, and how we've gotten to this point as a framework, as an ecosystem will be super interesting. And thank you again for chatting with me today.
I can't wait. I can't wait to have the conversation. And I also can't wait to have the hallway track. It's always such a treat to just talk to a bunch of individuals who are interested in having a conversation about Ruby and on Rails. So if you are at RailsConf, please do catch me in the hallway. I will be around that entire first day up until the keynote, and I'd love to talk to you.
That's awesome, David. We will see you in Philadelphia in July.
Awesome.